Thanks for having me. Good morning, I guess. Also, welcome to Tim Exile, who's also on the panel conversation. He's a great musician. He's also founder of Endless, which is I'll just say social music making app. We're going to be talking all about that in a few minutes. First, I'd love to introduce the topic a little bit and kind of the why and the how of this crisis indeed may accelerate changes to the format of music that have already been in place. So to start off, I want to tell a few anecdotes and kind of paint a picture of how the application of technologies, not directly related to music, have changed the way we experience music by default. And a few years ago, I met the director of the Vienna State Opera, who shared a lot of histories about it, or a lot of stories about its history. And one in particular, at least to me, stood out, which was about Gustav Mahler, the composer who was the director of the Vienna State Opera at the end of the 19th century, or the turn of the 19th century. And opera had been really different from how we experience it now, and I didn't know that at the time. People would come and go during the performances. They would even bring food in, they'd chat. And Mahler made a change to this. There had been electric lighting installed in the hall, which made it possible to start dimming the lights. So people were expected inside before the lights were dimmed. They'd close the doors, and in doing this, Mahler, as well as Wagner, but elsewhere, is partially responsible for shaping how we experience opera today. It's a very formal thing where you sit down and you don't clap until the end, basically. Then there's an advance in metal casting, which made it much easier and cheaper to create the iron frames for pianos that hold the strings. And this made pianos affordable for middle-class households who purchased pianos because they were considered like upper-class items. So music entered the households like that, and with it, the publishing industry surged. Later on, a similar thing would happen with radio and then record players, and it changed our default experience of music. Because prior to that, if you wanted to hear your favorite song, you or someone you knew, maybe someone in your household, would have to know how to play or sing it, maybe with the piano. And this meant that songs would sound a little bit different every time you'd hear them. It also meant that music would be more social and participative by default. So as players, like record players or CD players, etc., became cheaper and moved into every car, every room of the house, music became more individualistic. And eventually technology obviously made it possible to put music into everyone's pockets. Then we started unbundling the album, started personalizing playlists and recommendations, and it's all pushed the trend of individualization even further, leading to perhaps what is now a partially utilitarian attitudes around music, like music for doing the dishes, coffee time jazz, that type of stuff. So I'm using these anecdotes to point out that not only are a lot of these qualities new to music and introduced by the application of technology by people such as Tim, but they are also not necessarily inherent to music. And music can be many things, and it has seen many different defaults over the last century alone. So with that, I want to basically open this conversation and talk a lot about Endless together with Tim, because in a time of lockdown and in a time of pandemic, we're seeing a lot of things take off and a lot of trends accelerating that have been around, such as live streaming for one, but hadn't really seen any kind of saturation yet. And now we see like a very saturated streaming market already, and it's just getting started, it's just getting developed. So having said that, I'll ask Tim, maybe for you to introduce yourself, maybe a little bit of your background, and then let's talk a bit about what is Endless in basic terms, and how does it work when someone starts using the app.
Thank you, Bas. Thank you very much for having me here. It's a great opportunity to speak about, well, obviously what I'm working on, what we're working on at Endless, but also this brave new world, and as you say, these trends that are that have been kind of accelerated by the crisis. So, yeah, my name's Tim Exile. I'm kind of a recovering musician. I spent 10 years as a touring artist. I had a record deal with my favorite record label, and I sort of, I toured the world. And my first musical experience was playing the violin, which is an instrument when you put your bow on the string, and you make noise. And when you stop moving your body, the music stops. And then I fell in love with electronic music, which is very much the opposite. It's very much kind of automated. It's music that you design and then execute with a space bar or a play button and hear what it sounds like, and you don't have that visceral feedback. But my artist career, when that was my main focus, was led by wanting to play music viscerally. But that was kind of at odds with the record industry, because what the record industry wants perfectly executed products which can be distributed on a large scale, and performance and particularly improvisation and spontaneity in music are kind of at odds with that. So and that's, for me, that's always been what's most valuable in music. And so I sort of ended up steering into tech, building tech solutions, firstly to allow me to improvise. I spent a few years as a kind of improvising electronic musician, trying to make a career out of that, to some success, but not the success that I'd dreamed of. And at some point I realized that the biggest opportunity in what I was working on was not me as an artist. It was, bringing this technology to spontaneous music creation technology. Firstly, bringing that into products that were very accessible, and secondly, finding a new purpose for doing that, because the record industry didn't provide that purpose for spontaneity, and that kind of segues into what Endless is about. So Endless is it's a multiplayer music making platform that allows people. So we launched our app in the App Store just over 3 weeks ago. And it allows users to create little riffs and join jams. So on the front page of the app, you've got a list of jams that anyone from the world can join in right now. And you sort of create and remix riffs in a sort of chat room style interface. So I can make something, as soon as I finish making that thing, it's shared with everyone. Someone else can jump in, remix that, add something to that, take something away from that, and so it unfolds in a conversational way. And then of course you can also start your own jams and invite friends as well. So that's me, and that's Endless.
Right. So what you've basically done is you've created a form of let's say recorded music that people then iterate on, and so rather than having like a live jam session, so for instance in a stream or something like that, people are iterating on each other's riffs, as you call them. Yes.
So one of the things we really wanted to do was to make it conversational, because there's a lot of collaboration is a very popular term, but it's also a very broad term these days, and there are lots of different ways that collaboration can happen. I mean, the two most common ones, I think, are collaboration in terms of like a brand collaboration, where you sort of you potentiate two audiences by bringing them together and cross-pollinating them. And another one is this kind of the Google Docs paradigm, where you can get multiple users, collaborating on one single truth in order to get to one single final product. Whereas what we're focusing on in Endless is conversation, which allows multiple people to kind of go off in different directions and be sort of spontaneously creative.
So how did you get started even? Like how would you have expressed like the idea when it was still, I guess you were talking to a designer, or maybe you were doing it yourself? Like how did you start?
Well, actually it started out as it was a kind of creative technology project. It was, I started out by building the instrument that I wanted to play, that worked in a way that would allow me to improvise and create electronic music spontaneously. But it was a single player instrument. But at a certain point, I realized that there's a way that it could be turned into a multiplayer instrument. So I was quite lucky, actually, that I built a small following as an artist and a creative technologist. So by the time I sort of got round to founding Endless, basically, that I already had quite a good community around me of people who understood what I was doing and understood the potential of it and how it could become what it's become today. So that was I was quite fortunate to have that community around me.
Right. So I guess since you launched 3 weeks ago, it might be too early to ask if you see like the effects of the pandemic and the lockdown on your app and your community, or maybe you actually do because the community existed already in beta stage.
It is too sick because we launched, we opened the gates. We launched in the App Store right at the peak of the pandemic. So the uptake has been absolutely great. I mean, we've spent nothing on digital advertising, and just the natural sort of. It's probably not appropriate to say viral uptake, but the organic uptake has been really, really strong. But also, sorry, go on.
No, so then I might have I didn't want to interrupt you, but like now I already have, because then maybe it's interesting to talk about what trends you think are being accelerated by the pandemic, from your perspective as a musician and founder.
So, well, I think so. The main value chain of the recorded industry has been recorded music. That evolved. Since Edison recorded sound, and the technology, the technology for creating music, for distributing music, for consuming music, all followed that kind of primary revenue stream, really. But of course, that revenue stream got massively disrupted like 15, 20 years ago. And ever since, we've been trying to find ways to kind of reconfigure the music industry around recorded music, really. But I think it's that's been challenging, and there's a huge number of musicians. I mean, it's had a very kind of like polarizing effect, well, not polarizing, but very, it's done this to the distribution curve. So really it makes, if you're a big artist, it's very much winner takes all with recorded music these days. But I think, I've felt that there's been this kind of undercurrent of wanting to make music a bit more sort of tribal, a bit more relevant to small groups of people who may be smaller musicians, less well known, but that have a very big impact in a small community surrounding them. That instead of huge musical acts or brands establishing a global brand, that will see a new generation of kind of smaller, maybe less well known artists, or artists that are known in a very tight knit local community, or a sort of an interest group community, or niches, and obviously that's how that's very much been accelerated by the pandemic.
Right. So when you mentioned tribal, and I guess tribes, do you mean is it like similar to scenes, or even smaller than what a typical scene would look like?
A typical scene,
like a music scene.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I think of tribes, I think of like the really good live streams. The one are the streams where they maybe have like a sort of 100 concurrent viewers, which and there's a real vibe on the stream. You feel like as long as the artist playing on the stream is doing something that that is interactive. Either they're directly chatting with the audience, or they're creating music in a way that they can kind of, they can change their course in response to the viewers. And it has a really strong energy to it. I mean, I think there's, obviously live streaming is just blown up, and we've got some very big streams that have got thousands of viewers. But I think the ones that are really, really successful and really engaging, and I think that will still be around, like once, whenever lockdowns are lifted, these provide a new kind of value that we can't really have in IRL, which is kind of like small but distributed communities around a particular person. I mean, there's a great modular synth live stream with this guy called Colin Benders, and he's been doing live streams since 2014 on Twitch, and he built this audience around him, and so he's built a career for himself with this sort of relatively small community. I mean, not the kind of community that would be scalable within the sort of playbook of the traditional recorded music industry. However, he's built a career out of it. He's built a very strong community around it, and I think this is I think the pandemic is going to really push forward this almost kind of like democratization, but it's not. Yeah, it's this sort of tribalization of like small tribes of creators and their communities.
I think for me, when all the live streaming just got started, when like things started getting locked down and everyone started jumping on live streams, I was quite skeptical or cautious about the majority of them, because for me, the platform through which your music now occurs is a platform that is full of distractions. And if you have live music, I think there is some type of participation by the audience, even just by being there and being in the place. But also there might be interaction, there might be dancing, there might be singing along and clapping and things like that. And that kind of all goes missing when we watch a stream, unless it's a good stream, for instance, that really connects to a tribe, as you called it. So what I've been looking at for a long time when it comes to, let's say, digital music, to simplify it, is how can it be more engaging, or how can it compete with all the other things that are on your cell phone or on your computer? And for me, like the best comparison is, or like the type of media that figured it out in the best way is gaming, whether it's like mobile games or other games. And actually gaming got into huge issues with piracy at exactly the same time as music did. And I want to actually open that topic up and see what similarities you see between like gaming and esports and music, or making music more participative, whether it's live streaming or multiplayer music making, as you call it. Yeah,
well, I mean, I think it's, gaming is really on the rise at the moment. It was on the rise before the pandemic. I think the key point with gaming is that the people who kind of rise to the top in gaming rise to the top based on their skill. Whereas with musicians these days, big musicians, they build a brand, and it's maybe the people who actually execute the music behind the scenes are people you never see. Whereas with gamers, it really is about skill. And what that also means is that these gamers are playing games that their streamers will understand how to play. And so their audience, the streamers' audience will understand how to play the game, and so they'll appreciate the skill. And I think that's a very, very powerful effect that music doesn't really play into so much these days. And I think there's huge opportunities for new music making platforms. I mean, particularly for Endless, this is something we think about a lot. And when we designed the workflow, we wanted to design it in a way that the best games are really easy to get into, but almost infinite in the depth that you can go into, and the skill level that you can build up in that game. And that provides a really powerful magnet, I think, for audiences to gather around. And they gather around a skill rather than a brand.
Right. So I think actually an interesting aspect of that is like YouTube tutorials being made by like top producer. I mean, I'm like you, probably also more of an electronic music guy. So I'm sure it's the same with like bands and other types of musicians. But I see loads of producers creating like YouTube tutorials and what's his name? Joust. I'm not actually sure how to pronounce it. Jauz. He does a weekly, I believe, feedback session where he gets people to send Ableton projects to him, and then he opens a random one on Twitch, and he goes to kind of make the track better, and he talks through what he's doing. Now, I think when people talk about there being like a business around that, they say, well, but not everyone's a producer, not everyone, selling sample packs. You can't really fully do that for a living. Do you expect more people will actually be involving themselves in some way with musical creation or interaction?
Absolutely. And this is, I mean, you basically kind of drawn a box around exactly the space that we're wanting to kind of enter into with Enders, because I think there's a huge potential market there. I mean, we did a bunch of kind of interest group research on using Facebook audiences, and the number of people who are interested in production and interested in production tools specifically is about the same worldwide as people that are interested in mobile gaming. And you know how big the mobile gaming industry is. So there's something huge is waiting to happen there. But I think the problem at the moment is that the tools that this ecosystem is building up around are tools that are essentially built to create very highly polished music. So they're very complex tools, and they've got very steep learning curves. They've got infinite possibilities, all sorts of places for you to get lost and get caught in hours of editing. So I think if there are tools that are both simple and deep and allow this kind of like conversational, collaborative creativity, I think a sort of a skill-based music industry could arise, like on a mass scale. I think that's my hunch anyway.
So I mean, actually, I guess a lot of apps. I mean, obviously, mobile phones they make it easier for people to somehow get like musically involved. I guess it might be quite daunting to put like a digital audio workstation on your laptop or whatever. And again, not everyone has access to their own computer, but probably everyone has some type of smartphone. But a lot of the apps we see are actually kind of designed to create songs or like finished tracks, and are maybe not necessarily, how to say, recognizing the reality of the medium that they're on and doing, which is the communication. It's actually a kind of a social medium, and doing something different. Besides your own, what are other, whether it's like musical creation apps or musical interaction apps you've seen that make it easier for people to perhaps experience music in a different way, to feel creative with a very low type of barrier?
I mean, there's been a lot of them. I think probably the first one that really did it well was this app called Figure by Propellerheads, which again allows you to make small loops. And there's been a number of different apps over the years, and then sort of more recently you've got publishers like Gizmart, who did Beatmaker Go, and then more recently Jamble, and these are apps that are around really getting you very quickly to an experience of like having created something and put something together. And then there's also another generation of apps that are more like Novation Launchpad app, that allow you to kind of combine loops. And So there's a huge there's a huge number of apps, and some of them are very, very successful, that allow this experience of like getting to some kind of creative result quite quickly, and having a satisfying experience in the process. I think the really interesting big opportunity now is to then plug that into this kind of like professional production world, and somehow find a happy medium in between the two, where we'll start to see creators kind of graduating from this kind of my first beat experience all the way up to kind of what I say large scale distribution, but building up audiences, building up communities, building up careers, and revenue streams around that. I think it's a plugging in of this like really exciting new mobile world and the sort of the old guard of desktop production. I think that's super exciting.
Right. So we're gonna have to wrap up. The organizers warned us a half an hour just flies by. Oh, hi, Storm.
You got started a little late, though. Keep going.
All right.
I will ask this, though, before we conclude. Tim, if you wouldn't mind dropping into the chat box if you get a chance. I've dropped in your URL, your website, but if you have a website for the app or anything like that, absolutely, or any way they could, anyone could contact you about that, that would be great. And boss, before we depart too, if you could drop your contact information into the chat room, that would be fantastic. Okay, let's conclude.
Okay, thanks very much.
Yeah, I guess that's the conclusion. We've
anything else? Great. Any closing statement, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Tim, we talked beforehand, you should say something as a closing statement about co-presence.
Oh, co-presence. Yeah, I think this is the really important thing, particularly in this lockdown scenario. That the really key thing about live musical experience is that sense of co-presence. And that involves some kind of interactivity. So I think the musicians who will thrive and come out of the crisis with a strong audience who will thrive are musicians who offer some kind of sense of co-presence with their community, either on their live streams or on social media. It's that sense of visceral interactivity. Yeah, that's. So much more to say, but
yeah. Well, thank you so much for taking your time out of your day to be here, to both of you, and thank you for sharing your knowledge.